It was a typical night, and I found myself working the closing shift at my job, Taco Bell. The restaurant was relatively quiet, with only a few customers coming in for their late-night cravings. As the hours ticked by, the atmosphere became increasingly calm, with the occasional chatter of coworkers breaking the silence. I had just finished wiping down the counters when my coworker Emily approached me. She asked if I could cover the drive-thru window while she took her break. Admittedly, if it was anyone else, I would have said no, but I've always kind of had a thing for Emily, so I agreed. For the next hour or so, the drive-thru remained steady, but nothing out of the ordinary. I took orders, handed out meals, and exchanged conversations with the usual teenagers and frat bros that came through at night. It was a typical night shift at Taco Bell, just as expected. As the clock approached midnight, the number of customers dwindled, and the drive-thru line finally cleared. I decided to take a short break and stepped away from the window. I grabbed a drink from the employee break area and just leaned against a counter by the drive-thru window. As I sipped my drink, I couldn't help but glance at the security camera feed displayed on the monitor nearby. Most of the time, it was just a view of the empty parking lot, occasionally illuminated by passing cars. But on that particular night, something caught my attention. I squinted at the screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. A figure, small and hunched over, emerged from the darkness at the edge of the parking lot. It shuffled closer, moving erratically. I left my half-finished drink on the table and made my way to the front counter. I stared out the glass doors, watching as the figure drew nearer. As it came into view under a light, I realized it was an elderly man, disheveled and unsteady on his feet. I decided to step outside and offer him assistance. I pushed the door open and approached the man, asking if he needed anything. The man turned toward me, his eyes glazed over, seemingly lost in his thoughts. He muttered something unintelligible before abruptly changing direction, heading towards the side of the building. I almost followed him, but ultimately decided to let it go. It was above my pay grade anyways. Not even 5 minutes later, I was chatting with one of my other coworkers, Dante, when Emily approached us looking shook. She told us to watch out because some creepy old guy was hanging around outside the restaurant, according to a couple customers who had left and saw him standing near the back of the building, staring at the sky and talking to himself. We told her we'd keep an eye out, and as the night progressed, it managed to slip my mind until we were closing. The shift lead told me to take the trash out. I was about to walk out there alone when Dante stopped me and offered to accompany me, reminding me of the creepy old guy from earlier. Realistically, we assumed there was no way that guy could have still been out there. We carried the trash bags together out the back and across the parking lot towards the dumpster. I was about to enter the little shed that the dumpsters were kept in when Dante held his arm out to stop me. He pointed and told me to look. Through the crack in the shed gate, we could see what had to be a person, crouched down behind the door like they were hiding. I shifted my gaze to the bottom of the gate, and a pair of shoes underneath it confirmed we were seeing a person in there. We both made eye contact and just kind of non-verbally agreed to walk back inside. When we got back, we told the shift lead what we saw. Our shift lead, Oscar, was a 29-year-old buff Mexican dude who didn't take shit from anyone, so he said he'd go out there and take a look. Soon after he went outside, I was just leaning against the drive-thru window when a loud banging erupted on the glass, causing me to practically lunge forwards. I spun around to see that elderly man standing at the window. He had one hand on the glass and a gaping mouth. It was a scary thing to see, to say the least. He paused for a second, then started banging the window with what looked like a squirrel carcass that had been skinned while screaming my name. I ran towards my coworkers and screamed for someone to phone the cops. Emily got on the phone with 911 while Dante and two of my other coworkers ran outside to look for the guy. I stayed inside, and they came back in a couple minutes later along with Oscar. They all said they had searched the whole property and found no one. Cops showed up not long after, along with the store owner, who I guess Oscar must have called. 3 cops conducted a search of the property. They found 4 skinned squirrel carcasses impaled on branches of nearby trees on the outskirts of the parking lot. Other than that, there was no sign of the guy. The store owner led them inside to review CCTV footage, and the rest of us went home after that. It was all anyone at the store talked about for the next month, but as far as I know, that man was never identified. I was living in New Hampshire and in a long-distance relationship with this chick I'd known for a while down in Rhode Island. I've always enjoyed long road trips, so often when I had time off work, I would drive down to spend a couple days with her. I was on one such trip in the winter. Typically, I would begin my journey in the afternoon and arrive at her place by dark. This trip I had left later than I had wanted, so with 40 minutes left in the trip, it was close to 10 p.m. I was starving, so when I saw a Bojangles sign on the highway, which happened to be my favorite fast food place, I exited, praying they were still open, and I saw they were as I pulled up. I parked right in front of the doors since the entire lot was empty, as was the Bojangles. While I was ordering, the door opened and someone came in. I have a bad habit I can't shake of always looking towards strangers when they make a noise, which often leads to awkward eye contact. So when I heard the door jingling open, I turned to see who was coming in. He was this younger guy, 20s probably, African American with a buzz cut that was slightly grown out. He was dressed in this odd shiny outfit, like he had just come from a costume party or something. I looked away and he got in line behind me, but I got this feeling he was watching me. I turned my head a little and could see he was facing me out of my peripheral vision. He could have just been looking at the menu, so whatever. I decided to eat my chicken in my car because they were cleaning in there and I didn't want to be in the way. I was listening to music on low volume, which allowed me to hear what sounded like someone drumming their fingers against my passenger side window. It was the guy with the weird outfit. He was crouched down to be level with my window and staring at me. I lowered the window and he instantly moved his face closer while asking if I could help him real quick. I asked what he needed help with, and he said moving some boxes around in his trunk that were preventing it from closing. Being the good Samaritan I am, I agreed to help him, given that his old 90s looking RAV4 was parked only 2 spots down, and I figured it'd be quick. His trunk was open, and he had a bunch of boxes in it, half of which were taken out. He explained to me that he needed help rearranging the ones he took out so that the trunk would close. The entire time he talked to me, he just stared directly at me with cold, droopy, almost lifeless-looking eyes. When I say his eyes could literally bore into my soul, I'm not kidding. His gaze made me so uncomfortable I actually avoided looking at him as I asked if there was any particular order he wanted the boxes in. It took him so long to answer that question I almost thought he didn't hear me, and he just said no. So with that, I started grabbing boxes and putting them in the trunk. I figured the sooner I got this done, the sooner I was on my way. I realized he wasn't picking up any boxes. He was just standing there, and I knew for a fact he was staring at me, but I didn't dare look at him. After putting my 3rd box in his trunk, I realized they were all empty. None of the cardboard boxes had anything in them. I'm friendly, sure, but not an idiot. The fact the boxes had nothing in them was disturbing, for sure. I hesitated while bent over with my hands on a fourth one and asked, "Are you moving or something?" 3 seconds went by, then a few more. I finally stood up and looked at him, and my eyes met with his. His eyelids were so droopy it almost seemed like he was high. He finally spoke, saying, "Yeah." Then there was a pause before he added, "My sister is." I didn't know what to do. I almost felt trapped, like if I walked away he might stop me. We were the only 2 people in this entire lot, too, and the only lights were from the Bojangles. It was super sketchy, but I just decided to do what he asked. Once all the boxes were in, I asked him if that looked good. He looked away from me for the first time and shut the trunk. It closed with ease. Then he opened it again and turned to face me. He waited a few seconds before saying, "Can you grab one of the boxes from the back for me? I'm gonna move it up front." He spoke very slowly, and there were multiple long gaps between his sentences. I looked at the specific box he pointed out. I leaned forward to try and grab it, but it just wasn't accessible from where I was standing. The other boxes were blocking it. He said, "You have to get in the trunk." Now this was where I drew the line. I stepped back and said, "Sorry man, but I really gotta get going." He just stared at me with his emotionless face as I went back to my car. As I started it, I was horrified to see him approaching my car quickly. I wasted no time in pulling out of there. I merged onto the freeway and drove on through the night. I didn't dare stop again that night until I got to my girlfriend's house. I can't say for sure what he was planning, if anything, but something about that scene was definitely off. The boxes being empty, him not helping me put them in, him asking me to get in the trunk when that was something he easily could have done himself. Not to mention his entire vibe was just unsettling. I worked at McDonald's for a bit after college because I was in need of some more cash to pay off my student loans. One night, about 10 minutes into closing, this guy walks in. He was wearing dark sweats and a zip front hoodie with a stained white shirt underneath, and had a patchy beard. I went to the register expecting him to approach the counter, but instead he took a seat in a booth across from the door and just sat there staring at me. Then he started to twitch as he was mumbling to himself while repeatedly clasping and unclasping his hands. I waited another few minutes and decided to go back to my closing duties, assuming he was some harmless junkie. I was wrong. I cleaned the fryers in the back for a little and then went back out to the front to mop as my other coworker had just finished sweeping. I was the only one out front, and for the record, that junkie was nowhere to be seen, so I assumed he left. Now, this particular McDonald's I worked at had a layout that was different than most others. The bathrooms were located at the end of a long hallway that was separated from the counter by a wall. So basically, anyone who was standing by the counter wouldn't be able to see down that hallway. I was mopping at one of the booths directly across from that hallway when I stopped, hearing a ticking noise. A ticking noise made by someone using their tongue and their lips, like the noise someone makes when they're calling a pet to them. It was so bizarre, and it took me a second to realize where it was coming from. But once I did, a slight fear set in. A man was poking his head out of the bathroom door at the end of the hall and facing me. I could tell from that distance it was the same guy who came in before closing due to his dark hood and beard. He was just making that ticking noise and staring at me, and the way only his head was showing out of the doorway was really eerie. I approached him saying, "Excuse me, sir?" He quickly pulled his head back into the bathroom and shut the door. So quickly it actually gave me a fright. I look back and truly don't understand my thought process here. I was a 24-year-old female who wasn't anywhere near strong at all, but for some reason at that moment, I made the mistake of entering that bathroom alone, without calling one of my much larger male coworkers first. I opened the door and found the lights were off. I turned them on but didn't see him anywhere. I didn't see his feet under any of the stalls either. I walked to the end of the bathroom to check by the urinals. He wasn't there either. Then the lights went off again. I froze, but when I heard that ticking noise start up again, I slowly turned to face the other end of the bathroom. I saw him. He was standing at the door, facing the door with his back to me. Then he began to slowly turn and approach me. I was so overcome with fear I didn't know what to do. His mouth was hanging open in an O shape, and he was staring at me while licking his lips. I screamed. 3 of my coworkers barged in no time. They lunged at the man and got him on the ground. I was so scared I just ran out of there. I was practically sobbing at this point, knowing I just narrowly avoided something horrible. Police arrived on the scene shortly, and the man was taken into custody. He was cursing out my coworkers, resisting handcuffs, staring me down and shouting awful things, a lot of which didn't even make sense. He even promised several times he'd be back to kill us all. The cops heard all of it. None of us even had to say much. The guy was purely insane. I wasn't involved much in the case, but hopefully he's not getting out of prison anytime soon. Even after I quit that job, I still have nightmares about the incident, and I sincerely hope I'll never see him again.